What if I told you that some of the most violent criminals in history were not outlaws, but employees? That the line between piracy and law was not drawn by morality, but by paperwork? And that the modern corporate world, insurance, multinational trade, even financial warfare was shaped not by honest commerce, but by legalized looting? When we picture pirates, we imagine skull flags, cutlasses, and lawless men hunted by empires. But that image hides a far more disturbing truth. Because for centuries, the world's greatest empires didn't fight pirates. They licensed them, they paid them, protected them, and took a share of the profits. This is the story of how governments turned piracy into policy, how looting became a business model, and how the system that created global trade also normalized theft at an industrial scale. And by the end of this video, you may realize something unsettling. Piracy never disappeared, it just changed its name. To understand how piracy became legal, we need to understand the world that created it. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, Europe was exploding outward. Empires were forming faster than governments could afford to defend them. Spain extracted mountains of silver from the Americas. Portugal controlled spice routes across the Indian Ocean. The Dutch and English raced to dominate global trade. But here was the problem. Maintaining navies was ruinously expensive. Ships cost fortunes. Sailors demanded wages. Wars never ended. And most European states were chronically broke. Tax systems were weak. Credit markets were primitive. And raising funds required either crushing taxes or borrowing from financiers who demanded power in return. So governments asked a dangerous question. What if war could pay for itself? What if violence could be outsourced? What if plunder, not production, became state revenue? The answer came in the form of a document that would change history, the Letter of Marque. A letter of marque was a government license granting private ship owners the legal right to attack enemy vessels. With it, you could seize cargo, sink ships, capture sailors, all legally. Without it, you were a pirate. With it, you were a privateer. The distinction had nothing to do with behavior, only allegiance. The privateer funded his own ship, recruited his own crew, paid for weapons himself. In return, the state took zero risk and demanded only a percentage of the loot. This was warfare without budgets, naval expansion without taxes, profit-driven violence. England, France, the Netherlands, and Spain all embraced it. Privateering exploded because it solved multiple problems at once. It weakened enemy trade, enriched domestic elites, funded wars indirectly, and expanded empire without expanding government. But this system created a perverse incentive. The more chaos at sea, the more profit for everyone involved. No empire exploited this better than England. Take Sir Francis Drake, celebrated today as a national hero. Drake didn't just explore, he looted Spanish ships across the Atlantic and Pacific. And Queen Elizabeth I didn't just approve, she invested. When Drake returned from a global raiding voyage in 1580, the profits were so enormous that they paid off England's national debt. Let that sink in. A single piracy expedition stabilized the finances of a major power. This wasn't accidental, it was policy. Privateers became financial weapons. They disrupted enemy supply chains, crippled rival economies, and redirected global wealth. This was economic warfare, centuries before the term existed. The Dutch followed suit. The Dutch West India Company wasn't just a trading firm. It was a private empire with the right to wage war, seize territory, and enslave populations. The English East India Company went even further. It raised armies, minted currency, negotiated treaties, and looted entire regions under corporate authority. These were not rogue actors. They were state-backed monopolies, protected by law, guns, and contracts. Looting wasn't a crime. It was quarterly earnings. But systems built on plunder always face a problem. They eventually turn inward. By the late 17th century, privateering had spiraled out of control. Licensed privateers often attacked neutral ships, ignored peace treaties, continued looting after wars ended because war wasn't their income. Looting was the Caribbean became flooded with semi-legal raiders who no longer respected authority. And here's the irony. The same governments that created privateers now faced an uncontrollable piracy crisis. Merchants complained. Insurance costs exploded. Trade routes collapsed. Economic warfare had become economic sabotage. Worse still, privateers were destabilizing diplomacy. A single attack could drag nations into war. So governments attempted a fix. They rebranded pirates as criminals, declared piracy illegal, offered amnesties, held public executions, but the real problem remained untouched. States still needed cheap violence, still wanted profits without accountability, still relied on private actors to enforce power. So piracy didn't end. It just moved into corporations, banks, and trade monopolies. The long-term consequences were devastating. Colonized regions were stripped of wealth, resources, and autonomy. Local economies collapsed. Violence became normalized as economic activity. Entire global inequalities were locked into place. Europe industrialized using stolen capital. Colonies became extraction zones. Trade wasn't free, it was enforced. And when the system began to falter, empires collapsed under their own contradictions. Spain drowned in inflation from stolen silver. The Dutch overextended militarily. Britain inherited the system and refined it through finance rather than ships. Looting evolved. Instead of boarding vessels, power shifted to debt traps, trade imbalances, currency manipulation, corporate monopolies. The pirate flag was replaced by contracts. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern global economics still rewards legalized extraction. Today, corporations extract resources with state protection, exploit labor through legal loopholes, privatize profits while socializing losses, and governments still outsource coercion. Private military contractors, corporate sanctions, financial warfare. Consider this. The world's largest corporations often generate revenues larger than nation-states. They operate across borders. They influence laws. And when they fail, governments bail them out. That's not free markets. That's licensed power. The same logic that justified privateers now justifies financial imperialism, resource monopolies, economy. The mechanism hasn't changed. Only the branding has. Every era tries to regulate this system. Anti-monopoly laws, international trade agreements, corporate responsibility pledges. But they fail for the same reason anti-piracy laws failed centuries ago. The system depends on extraction. Governments benefit, elites profit, costs are externalized. And when abuse becomes too visible, the response isn't structural reform, it's rebranding. Pirates became privateers, privateers became corporations, corporations became too big to fail. The cycle repeats. So what do we learn from this history? Takeaway 1. Piracy is a legal definition, not a moral one. Who is a pirate depends on who writes the law, not what is done. Takeaway 2. States have always outsourced violence from ships to corporations. Power prefers distance from accountability. Takeaway 3. Looting built the modern world. Global trade didn't emerge from fairness, it emerged from force. And here's the warning. Any system that rewards extraction over production will eventually consume itself. Empires fall, corporations collapse, but the logic remains. The question isn't whether piracy exists today. The question is, who is licensed to profit from it now? If you want more hidden histories of money, power, and empire, stories they don't teach in school, subscribe to the channel, like the video if this changed how you see the world. Share it with someone who still thinks piracy is just ancient history, because once you understand how looting became legal, you'll never look at global power the same way again.